Adventures on the Gorge presents the Adventure Forum. Adventures on the Gorge Resort sits on the very rim of the New River Gorge, America's newest national park. We have whitewater rafting that can be as mild or as wild as you want. We'll take kids as young as 6, and 6 to 11-year-olds raft free every day all summer long. We have cabins on site, restaurants, zip lining, and a lot more. Plus, we're only a bridge away from the shops and restaurants of Fayetteville. Are you ready for an adventure? Check us out on the web at adventuresonthegorge.com.
And good evening, everyone. I am Chris Hayes, your Adventure Forum host. To all of our viewers out there who are joining us via Zoom or on Facebook Live, just to let you know, if we have time near the end of our discussion, we will open up the floor to some questions from you guys. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the Zoom's question and answer function, or just make the comment on the Facebook Live page and it will get sent over to us. So on March 1st, 1872, President Ulysses S. Grant signed the Act of Dedication Law, creating Yellowstone, the first national park in the United States. In doing so, President Grant essentially created what would become the national park system. Since then, the national park system has grown to include 423 official sites of varying designations. 63 of those have the designation of national park. Now, these 63 areas and national parks have at times been called America's best idea. Tonight, we are here to discuss America's newest best idea, the New River Gorge National Park and Preserve. Now, I want to introduce our guests and panelists tonight. We have Roger Wilson, Dave Arnold, and Lizzie Watts with us. And I'm going to go ahead and just one at a time, let everybody out there know. If they don't know who you are, let them know who you are and why you're here, and maybe a part that you played in getting this designation changed for us. Lizzie, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Watts. I'm the Superintendent of New River Gorge National Park and Preserve, Dolly River National Recreation Area, and the Bluestone National Scenic River.
Great. And can I ask you one thing real quick? When did you join us here in this area?
I came back about 3.5 years ago, but I
Okay.
have been here a couple other times. So
Okay.
I have a
Great.
rich history with this park.
Awesome. Dave, you're up next.
Yeah, I'm Dave Arnold. I'm one of the founders, co-founders of ClassVI River Runners and Adventures on the Gorge, and I presently sit as a board of director member of Adventures on the Gorge.
Okay, and Roger Wilson.
I am CEO of Adventures on the Gorge.
All right, well, welcome to all of you guys. It's a pleasure to have you all here. And I'm going to go ahead and jump right into some of the questions that we've got for this evening. And Lizzie, we're going to start with you. The New River Gorge was named a national river in 1978. And how does being upgraded to a national park and preserve change things for us?
It doesn't change things, except it gives us probably more awareness and more national awareness. We've already known for years and years that we have a tremendously remarkable resource here that was the national river. By changing it to a national park status, it puts us in the lead of the 63 national parks out in the United States. But it also really highlights the fact that we have just tremendous ecosystem. It's the river, it's the ecosystem, it's the botany, it's the biology. We are one of those nationally significant areas in the United States where we have so many unique natural and cultural and heritage resources tied together. It also allows more people to understand why we're so special. I think all of us that have played and used and climbed or hiked or just sat by the river for a long time have already known that. But this gives the national park status, really just lets other people know that this is a really and truly special area that they should come visit.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when I was kind of looking at national parks, and I think the new is relatively unique within those 63 properties that are national parks, because some, most of them are pristine wildernesses and more geared towards that, and a few are historical or cultural in nature. And really here in the New River Gorge, just like you said, we have both of that, and I think that's really awesome. That's very unique and a great thing. And the National Park Service, some of the work that you guys have done revitalizing the Nuttleburg area and stuff like that to bring that cultural part of what the New River Gorge has contributed to our country is pretty incredible. So we appreciate that. I'm going to jump over to Dave. Dave, my question for you is, can you give us a little bit of a history of how this happened? I mean, if you want to, go back to getting it turned into what it took to get it turned into a national river, and then the steps from there over the years that it's taken to get us the national park designation here in the New River Gorge.
Well, I think that what's most important is to realize that this is a process that's been happening for 70 years. So, there were a lot of people in the 50s, in the 60s that talked about it. Obviously, we went to become a national river in 1978. At that point, we had very little land. Most of the land was still private ownership. Over the last 40 years, a lot of the land has been acquired. And I think it's really important to know that this has always been a park where it's a willing seller and a willing buyer. There's not eminent domain in this park. You want to sell, you can. You don't have to. You can be what's known as an inholder. So now we're at a stage here, and it's been 40 plus years, and the opportunity came about to make this a national park, which was the original vision in the 50s. And thank God we had all the support of our members of Congress, and I think we have a whole new game today. We've stepped up to the major leagues. Like you said, Chris, there's over 400 parks, but there's only 63 that are national parks. So whatever you want to call it, the gold standard, all that language, we're now in the major leagues, and that comes with a lot of responsibility. And it also comes with what Lizzie touched on, with a lot of press. There was an amazing article today out about in Travel and Leisure, which is a major international magazine, about an island in Hinton that you can rent the whole island. It's called Coney Island. So we're going to see all kinds of things happening in all the different areas of the park and preserve. We're going to see it in Hinton. We're going to see it in Mount Hope. We're going to see it in Oak Hill. We're going to see it in Fayetteville.
Yeah, it's funny that you brought up that Coney Island. I saw that yesterday on a website that I was looking at, and I thought to myself, well, where in the heck is this place? So I Google searched and looked at the map and figured out where it was at, and I thought that was pretty interesting. You can rent a private island on the New River. So.
And I think what you're touching on there, Chris, is what I think some people don't realize is this park is, a long, skinny park, and who wins in a national park is always the key gateway towns. So that's a great example. Hinton is going to be the beneficiary of all that press in Travel and Leisure. So it's awesome that we're going to see this in all these little towns, and hopefully in the next 20 years, we'll see a major change. And the biggest change is, like I said, it's the gold standard that we're in the major leagues.
Great. Roger, I'm going to flip over to you now. What do you think the new designation will do for the local economy here in Fayetteville? Not just for Adventures on the Gorge, but for some of the other smaller business owners here in town and the surrounding areas, Oak Hill and Summersville.
Chris, I want to touch a little bit on what Dave said. This is going to help all the communities around the park. To me, this is not a short-term gain. This is rather, we're creating long-term value here. I see over time, and it'll take some time, opportunities that'll be created by demand. with the increased visitation from, people from all over this part of the country. And my hope and how I feel is this increase of visitation, it'll create that demand, that'll create these opportunities so our local people can create businesses on their own and we can grow over time.
All right. Guys, I'm getting a couple of questions coming in on the question and answer that I think are kind of relevant to some of the questions that I was going to be asking anyway. So I'm going to kind of throw them in here. Lizzie, my next question for you is going to be, what does this mean for the National Park Service and in this area? And I'm getting I got a message from, or a question from Paul Brewer, wondering about can funding increase for trails and parking happen now that we're a national park? I'd mentioned a lot of the projects and improvements that the National Park Service has made in this area, which has been a great help to the rafting industry and the tourism industry here in this area. Will having the designation of a national park put us further up, I guess, on the ladder for potential budgeting to get some other improvements in and maybe fix some minor problems that are happening with some of the infrastructure around?
Be honest, the bill change doesn't change that at all. They're two different parts of the world of how Congress works.
Yeah.
But what it will do is, it's not the bill change that did it. It's the Great American Outdoors Act bill may help us. And the fact that both Senator Manchin and Capito really pushed through legislation to get the Great American Outdoors bill passed. That bill has potential because that actually has funding attached to it. The name change, the legislation for a name change, has nothing to do at all. It's on a completely different track than funding. But the Great American Outdoors bill will probably help us. And it'll help all national parks. And truly that bill was pushed and supported so strongly by Congress on both sides, by partisan Congress, because we don't own these places. We rent them for the next generation. So, and that's truly the case in any national park, no matter what the designation is. So this is the gift that we give the next generation. And so whatever we can do to keep it in good shape. And I honestly think this also changes where support needs to come from for parks, not just this park. We are very fortunate that we have a lot of local volunteers and local associations that really are very supportive. But all folks that play in national parks should really figure out a way to help support the long-term resource that we're giving our next generation. And I think that's what this bill also will help us do. When you educate and make more awareness to why national parks are so significant, it helps everybody understand that we all play a part in preserving this resource, so that we do give it back to the next generation in both shapes. But tell Paul, unfortunately, I wish funding did come with the bill, but it did not. I take it in a heartbeat.
I have a question, a personal question for me, Lizzie, and maybe you can help explain this to me. Does becoming a national park increase the protections of the surrounding area above and beyond what being a national river was? I know of the different river designations, a national wild and scenic river versus a national river versus, there's some different levels of protection there. Does becoming a national park, is that considered the highest? Or
it is considered the highest. We're not a wilderness area, so that a national park with a wilderness area is probably the highest protection in some ways. It definitely has the most stringent rules and regulations for long-term protection of a wilderness area. We're one, and we're not the only national park that is not a wilderness, doesn't have a wilderness area in it. So we won't be alone in that aspect. The areas that were set aside, those 4 areas that now are part of the park versus part of the preserve, are all areas nationally significant further on. Sandstone Falls, it's the most spectacular waterfall on the river. Its average is 25 feet, and geologically, it starts the story of a northern flowing river. And so you can see geology at its best there. If you move further up, you go to Grandview, and Grandview was added to the park because it's one of the highest places in the park, and its views of the river are spectacular. Nowhere else can you see that S curve that you can see from the Grandview overlook. So for many, many, many years, it has been one of the scenic views of the park. Then you go down to Thurman, which tells our rich railroading history. And we're one of the parks in the Park Service that in their enabling legislation, Senator Byrd was wise, and he knew the value of the human history here and how important it was to building this great nation. So coal mining and railroading and logging, those stories can be told in Thurman. That's a special little town that a lot of people don't realize in its heyday were so wealthy and so important to bringing people from all over the world here to work and mixing those cultures and creating that diversity that we have, but also human diversity, but also human sets of skills that built America. Without industrial age, none of us would be where we are today. We wouldn't be sitting in the richest country in the world. So those stories are imperative for the next generation to know that if your great grandfather worked in a coal mine in southern West Virginia, that he or she helped build the country that we're proud of today. And then the last is the Gorge, and nobody can explain how spectacular that V-shaped gorge is and the geologic story it tells, both from a boat side of the house with most of the whitewater, or the fact that it is visually one of the more spectacular parts of the park. And then this little sandstone that makes that rock so spectacular to climb on. Those 4 areas were intentionally picked as the park, where all the other areas are just as important, but they may not have this true national significance. So that's how we had 4 areas to the park and the rest of the preserve.
Awesome. Dave, I'm got a question for you. And this is obviously a big question in the local area. What will the effect on hunting be in the park now, or in this area? Because it was one of the few, if I understand correctly, one of the few areas that did allow hunting throughout the country.
Well, first off, a park and preserve is designed to allow hunting in certain places. So we'll talk in terms of rough numbers. So we can't assume everybody knows this, but out of roughly 70,000 acres, 7,000 is protected in the park, and the rest is the preserve. And you can hunt in the preserve. Nothing has changed there. Originally, when we were looking at this bill, we thought maybe we could have a park that allowed hunting. Well, as a matter of fact, the bill was actually marked up at one point that way. And one of the things that comes with a national park is that you have national attention. And people forget that these parks are the people's parks. This is not, just our park because we live here. This is a national significant piece of property that is run by the federal government. What I learned is that as hard as I wanted to try to make it where you could hunt in the national park, that wasn't going to happen. So the big groups were really afraid that if we had hunting here, even though culturally, you know this, I'm a hunter. I mean, I spent 100 days in the woods this year probably, but the perception of someone shooting a buffalo at Yellowstone out of the window of their car, which obviously is never going to happen or shouldn't happen, they were afraid that the camel's nose under the tent would happen. So even though culturally we probably had a good reason to allow hunting in the park, this was not going to happen. They just weren't going to break national precedent. They meaning many of the groups that are nationally significant in park preservation. So what does that mean? So we are not going to be able to hunt in the park. Now, I will tell you this, That's a hard thing to taste and change if you've been hunting down there. But one thing that will happen, and this will take 20 years, but eventually you will find a lot of people hunting the perimeter of the park. You know, the preserve that's on the edge will become a on the edge of the national park will become a very, very valuable commodity for hunting. It's very traditional in hunting, especially deer hunting, if you have a sanctuary. A lot of private land has a sanctuary where you do not allow anybody to hunt. And we now have a 7,000 acre sanctuary. The best example of that I can give you is when Shenandoah National Park came in and no hunting was allowed there. If you look at the bear kill in Virginia, most of the kill is very close to the line. So what you have is you have people hunting close to the sanctuary. So I think there's a possibility we will have nationally known hunting here someday for bear, for deer mainly. But do I wish it would have been hunting, you know, on the whole area? Yeah, I tried, and we didn't get it. So, you know, and there's one thing, Chris, if I can add that I think people forget that's really important, and that is that we have preserved 70-some thousand acres. You know, my son's sons will see trees that, you know, we haven't seen in 100 years. So 100 years from now, these trees that are going to be protected, you know, they're going to see a woods that the American Indians saw. It's going to take a long time. And I'll tell you when I really changed my mind. One day I was talking to a gentleman named Charlie Bryant, who was a timber guy, and we were looking at the property. This was in the early 80s, and they had a substantial amount of timberland in the Golly Gorge. And he said to me, he said, "Dave, I'd be glad to sell my land, you know, to the federal government if I get a good price." But he said, "You need to understand, I'm a timber guy. You know, you have a family farm in Ohio and you grow corn, right?" I said, "Yeah, we grow corn." He said, "I grow corn. It's just 70 years to maturity or 40, depending on what species it is. We're going to timber this." So, you know, we could have been looking at a major timber job somewhere in the park. And it's one of the things that I think is really important that we should all be glad that didn't happen.
Okay. Thank you for addressing that. Roger, how do you think that these changes or this change in designation is going to affect you know, we talked about the smaller businesses a little bit earlier, a business like Adventures on the Gorge or Ace Outfitters or Rivers, one of, you know, some of the larger outfitters like our company?
I think over time we'll see increased visitation. I think we'll see increased awareness of our companies. I think this will help the people that do not know that we exist in West Virginia be able to search us out just because we're a national park. It's all good. It's all good stuff.
Good. And if I'm not mistaken, you told me we've already had a couple of folks call in and said we are coming because we've been to every national park there is.
Yep, absolutely. Actually, the day after it was signed, we got our first phone call.
Great. Let's see, Lizzie, I'm going to ask you, and this is another kind of here's another question, kind of along the lines of hunting, and it's something that there's many locals voiced concern over. Is how does access change with this new designation, particularly affecting private boaters, not the commercial operations like Adventures on the Gorge, but the people that they just drive down and park at Kennard and set a shuttle at Fayette Station and run the river? How is it going to affect them?
It's not going to affect them at all. The management won't change at all. You know, this park belongs to everybody. It doesn't belong to the commercial industry. It doesn't belong to the climbing groups. It belongs to everybody. So as long as people continue to use the river, pack it in, pack it out, they don't do any resource damage, and they just come and play on the river, this is what they're for. This is what national parks are for. And so I see no real changes at all, management wise at all. Will make no guarantees for what will happen 15 years from now, but right now I see no change at all forthcoming at all. We will just manage like we've always managed. But this is where we do expect and we hope folks will help. You know, there is a group, New River, Friends of New River. I think people that play in this park and use this resource should help support it in all kinds of ways. And they already do. We have, you know, tremendous river cleanups. We have tremendous volunteers that put hours in to clean up areas. But for private boaters that play here, it's their responsibility too, for all of us. I don't care if it's the commercial side, the business side, the tourism side, or just individual users. When you use an area, you need to respect it and you need to be willing to give time back to it. And I believe that. I think that's our responsibility of all of us. But that won't change just because the name changed. I just think that is what we're all supposed to do. And remember that we are really all doing this and preserving this resource for the future generations.
I couldn't agree more with it. Everybody's responsibility to be a steward of the area in which you live. So I'm going to take a quick break here, guys, do a little program note. To anybody who is just joining us out there, welcome to the Adventure Forum. Every other week, we are hosting discussions on topics of interest for both locals and traveling adventurers who are coming to visit our area. I am live here at Adventures on the Gorge Resort on the very rim of the New River Gorge, America's newest national park. If you have just joined us and have any questions, please feel free to use the question and answer function on Zoom, or if you're on Facebook Live, go ahead and put those comments, ask your questions in the comments, and they will get sent over to me on Zoom here. And we will try to get to as many of those as we can at the end of our discussion. So let me ask you, Lizzie, I've got another question for you. What kind of changes can people expect here short term versus the long term? I mean,
I think short term, the first thing that we're going to see is we'll start doing a name changing on signs. We've done 2 temporary signs. That is a big ordeal and it will take a lot of time to get them done, but we are in great gratitude of the state of West Virginia and the tourism division who, along with DOH, has put in for a federal grant, and we understand has received federal grants to be able to do some of our big signs on Interstate 19 and 77 and 40, you know, so that will be a big help. So that's the first thing that we'll see change. Other things that we'll see change, really the only other real major change is the reduction or the change in hunting. And so you will see us doing some programming on where are those maps, what does it look like, how does the boundary change? But the whole first year will just be education because we have to learn it as well as y'all do. You know, my other half's an old hunter, and so all of us have to learn where those boundaries are and how that changes. So for the first year, it'll be just education. It's us learning, y'all learn, and everybody that uses the park learning where those boundaries are. That'll take some time for people to get used to it, time for my staff, and also time for both hunters and other anglers that are used to using the park. Short term, that's the only real change I see, except I think we will have more national awareness and international awareness. I think what we do with that as a community, that is up to us. I think we have a rare opportunity to highlight and shine an incredible resource that does belong to the people. And so in long-term change, I don't know. How about that, for being honest?
Yeah, no, that's a very honest answer.
And I don't know what it'll look like.
Yeah.
It will be interesting to see us 10 years from now, to see where we stand and how the community may change. And, you know, if there's growth, how that growth will affect other businesses and other smaller businesses. I think COVID, as nasty as it is, I think one of the only good things, if there is a good thing with the COVID pandemic, is it made a lot of people realize that the out of doors is really a safer place to play. It has given a whole generation of families who didn't play outside to start playing outside and using those natural resources. both for mental health and physical health. We have seen an uptick, a huge uptick in new people on trails, new people boating, new people hiking, new people coming out to parks that in the last few generations hasn't happened that way. They're putting down their phones, they're putting down their tablets, and they're actually going and spending time in nature. And that is a tremendous gift. So I think we've born a new generation of folks that understand the true value of having an out of doors and learning more and more they can about nature. So that is a silver lining of what's happened this year.
Roger, I'd like to ask you this next question. What challenges do you think that this redesignation will present to the local area of right around here, around Fayetteville and Oak Hill? And
it may create some friction points with parking. It depends how many people come, and none of us really know what will happen. I think over time we'll see an increase, maybe some parking issue, maybe some crowding issues that we'll have to address. And unlike build it, they will come. They will come, and we will build the solutions.
Probably pretty true.
Dave or Lizzie, do either of you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think I agree with Roger. I don't think we know, number one, and we've already had challenges. The parks visitation has grown, and as more people are aware of areas closer to New York and Philadelphia and Washington and Atlanta, more people will come. How they come, we don't know, and what that's going to look like. The park expects to have, we already had trailheads that are overpacked and crazy, and this year was a good example that was even highlighted even more. So I think we know that there will be challenges, but the challenges were there before. They're just going to be a little different, I think, and I think we as a community have to figure out how to fix those challenges, and I think we work together to do that.
Hey, Chris, the only thing I'd like to add on that is,
Dave.
You started this by saying that President Grant signed the first park in 1872, which was Yellowstone. And so we're a long way down this path of national parks. And the amount of change that has happened since then has been phenomenal. Change will continue. It will happen. It will evolve. We're going to see change. But here's what I think is the most important. The change will come about when people get together and have positive input on the park. What can be done better? If people really, really say, I'll give you an example. Lizzie's probably going to cringe when I say this, but Kennard was built on a slab pile. It's a pile of refuge, the road in there. If we all agree that a long-term goal is to try to solve that and fix that, we have two senators that sit on appropriations. I'm telling you, we can get things done, but we got to work together, and people have to agree and figure out what's the most important, what can they agree on, what they can't. You want to see some people screaming, wait, see if Kennard closes down. Then you're going to see, and then you'll hear people like Roger and I and people telling stories about, oh, we used to do it from Thurman all the time. But no one's going to be happy. So we have an opportunity to change some things. Change will happen, and everybody working together on what is the most important will get things done. That I can almost guarantee that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The funny that you brought up Kennard. I mean, driving into Kennard now, the roads gets a little rough there in a couple of patches, and I've just have a thought to myself the last couple of years, this is going to be horrible if this gets closed down. My guides are gonna kill me because they'll be going from Thurman to 0 feet or something. Like that's going to be a tough year.
So here's the point.
This is great.
Yeah, so here's the point. Let's get proactive. Let's get positive. Let's figure out what's really important, and we can get her done. I really believe that with all my heart.
Guys, I'm going to move on I've got some good questions here coming in from the folks, so we're going to head towards that portion of the this evening's show. None of these are necessarily addressed to anybody specific. So I'm just going to kind of ask somebody. Dave, you actually were named on this one. This is from Glenn Lukacs. Wondering what will the designation as a national park have on the ongoing pollution into the New River and other rivers that feed into it?
Good question.
Well, I probably Lizzie, you'll probably want to answer that. But first off, hi, Glenn. Good to hear you all the way from Utah. So, you know, we've been slowly working on the pollution problem on New River for a long time. I was in Winona recently, and it really made me smile, you know, to see the system in place. Glenn, you remember playing pool in the pool hall, and we don't even need to talk about what happened to, you know, things there. You know, we've slowly made progress. Here's the most important thing on that. Those issues are huge dollar issues. These aren't, you know, the kind of issues like let's build a trailhead or let's make additional parking at Fern Creek. These are multi-million dollar issues. They need to be addressed. I think the focus of the national park will make that a little easier to be addressed. I think the fact that we have 2 centers on appropriations will help. We have some stars lined up, and it needs to be something we need to work on, no question. It is a little better than when I first started boating here in 1970, but it's still a problem.
Great. Lizzie, do you have anything to add to that?
I do. I mean, that is one of those problems in a viewshed area that everybody that lives in the viewshed needs to take to heart. Dave's right. Those aren't cheap solutions. They are very, very expensive, but they're essential. This is a national park with an incredible river that now runs through the middle of it. And it's our responsibility to figure out ways to get clean water and to reduce sewage. You know, we do all kinds of studies with USGS and our own staff. I mean, we have been collecting samples for 25 years, and some of the feeder streams have gotten better. It's no question asked. Some have not. And as Americans, clean water should be one of our most important things that we figure out that we need to do better as a nation. And so the Clean Water Alliance has gotten reactivated again. So if you're really interested in clean water, especially in the new, I would suggest that you get a hold of them. That group is looking at how do we help some of the feeder streams? How do we help some of the smaller communities that don't have wastewater treatment plants? And where do we solve those solutions? Because it is an issue, and it is our responsibility, partly because we live here and partly because we play here, to help figure out a solution for it. But Dave's right. They're long-term and they're big and they're expensive.
Yeah. The next question I've got that's come in from one of our viewers. It's interesting because we've already talked about a couple of these things. One being parking issues. This is from Lisa Queen. She's wondering if is there a committee to solve the problem with the parking issues at Fern Creek specifically. We've talked about that already being a problem. It is disheartening to drive down Lansing Edmond Road and watch the people that we are asking to visit this area having their cars towed because they're parked along the road. And then she says, if so, she would like to volunteer to help, which leads back to Dave being, we are all part of this and we all need to volunteer and work to get things fixed the way they need to be fixed. So I think that's interesting that she brought that up. I know, Lizzie, I've sat in the forum discussions with the climbing, about the climbing in the area, and that's always, that issue's been brought up several times. So can you address that? Is it going to be addressed, or is there a committee in place to help plan that?
There's not. Well, Interact, that's not true. I mean, we've had some local, a lot of the climbing groups have offered to help too. It's a multi-stage problem because you only can go so far out the boundary. One of the positive things that the bill did for us, which we did not have prior to this bill being come into law, the GOLI has a provision that allows us to buy property a mile outside the boundary of the valley. And when that was put in, that was truly put in for Swiss. Swiss was way down there, and someday we might want to buy it, and Lower Swiss Beach was important. When the new was set up, that was not the case. So we had no ability to talk to anybody outside of our boundaries. I didn't have legal permission to do that in any form or fashion. The bill now has allowed us, there's a line in the bill that allows me to have the authority to talk outside the boundary. And that might help solve the problem. You know, the state's willing to work, DOH is willing to work with us. Local landowners out there need to decide, do they want to be part of the solution, or do they just want to complain and be part of the problem? Because
Gotcha.
that is a commitment that other people have to help us make and help us fix. And I think we at least now can have conversation. We couldn't do that before the bill. So because the boundary, if y'all don't know that, it literally is in the middle of that road. It's on the right side of the road, so we don't even own up to the road. So there was some issues with that. At least now we can have more conversation. I'll be glad if a committee does get formed, I will be glad to let her know, because the more people that are working on it, the better chance we have to find a solution.
Okay. I've gotten several questions from Christine O'Toole, and unfortunately, I think she may have left the forum because we didn't have a chance to get to them, but I still think they're relevant questions. One of the things she asked was, earlier in the talk, I'd mentioned some minor problems about getting fixed. And all I meant by that was like the road to Kennard, and there are a couple of trails in the area that need some work done to them that have maybe been put on hold because of funding. That's all I meant was, do we have a better chance to get funding so those projects can get done?
The truth is the answer to that is no, but the other answer is, we actually apply for money, for special money, where we compete nationally across the country, and we do that every year. But we're 5 years behind. That's the way our system works. It's a 5-year comprehensive plan. So some of the trails will get worked on this coming year, long before the bill had anything to do with it, because we asked for that money and competed well 3 years ago in our cycle of getting funding. So they'll see some improvements like that. They'll see improvements on some of our minor roads already. That's already built into our funding special project systems that we asked for. Kennard is a big one. Kennard is outrageously, to say that that's a little fix. Federal Highways would have a conversation with you to explain that that's not a little fix.
Yeah.
That whole road is falling off the mountain. And that's many millions of dollars worth of work. And we've known about it. Everybody's known about it. Since the road was originally given to us, people understood that. And Federal Highways has fixed it twice. But they know that this is an issue. So it's in their queue. Where that goes, nobody knows. But it's not an easy fix. It's a really expensive fix. We all forget, and we talk about living in a gorge, but we forget that everything that is built in the park is on a gorge, and it's part of the gorge, no matter where you are. And what makes us so proud of this river is that it's a gorge. But what makes it so challenging to maintain both trails and access is it's because it's a gorge. So, we're truly blessed that we get a lot of rain, a whole lot of rain sometimes, and a lot of sunshine. And that whole lot of rain helps that gorge grow. And Mother Nature has always been smarter than wiser than any of us, I believe. And it will keep growing. So roads that are on it, trails that are on it, grow with that if we want them to or not.
Roger, I've got a question from Rob. I'm sorry if I butcher your last name here. A Rob Rachowski. Is AOTG on the rim of the New River actually within the park? If not, how far from the park is it? And then also, are there any accommodations within the park?
We are on the border with the park. We're not in the park. We do not have well, since we're not in the park, we do not have accommodations in it, but we have them bordering it.
And the park itself doesn't have lodging in it as well, as because we'd have to have a hotel built on the side of a gorge, as you said.
No, there's no inside the park itself, the new designation of
No.
park. There
But-
is no permanent lodging.
But plenty of accommodations very, very close to the park. Like Roger said, we sit right on the rim. We border, our property borders the park border. I've got another question from Paul Brewer. I believe he's actually also may have left the discussion, but he was asking, can ATV trails be built within the national park?
I don't think so, but I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to do some homework. ATVs are an interesting entity in national parks, not as much as either in recreation areas like the Gully or in preserves. So I honestly don't know the legislation. I don't know if we can do that or not. So don't know, but I can find out and let Paul know. National parks are more protective. So the idea of, I would hate to say and be wrong because I would rather tell you the truth. Truth is I don't know, but we can do some homework. I don't think any national parks have ATV trails, but I could be wrong on that. But I'll check and get back with y'all. I'll let you know.
Okay.
Let him know.
Another question I've gotten, this one came through from Facebook, so I'm not exactly sure who asked it, but it also kind of goes back to how will this affect users in the park, I suppose hikers, climbers, and that the question is it's kind of what are the odds of entrance fees and locked gates because of this redesignation? Slim
to none. I've heard this a couple times since the bill went through, and the bill was brought up by y'all, by many other entities, not the park and not the Park Service, to be honest. But I don't think people realize that the park could have been charging fees forever. Fees are not new, no matter if it's a national park, a national river, or a national preserve. I have the park authority to charge fees today. We haven't done that because we're new and we have lots of user groups. And we didn't, as long as people help us maintain it and take care of it. So we've never, we already charge fees and commercial use fees. So there are commercial use fees. Businesses are not allowed to make money off the federal government because it's the land that belongs to all of us. So we do charge user fees for commercial uses, but that has nothing to do with the designation. I think in the very beginning, I guess I had been told, somebody on Facebook said, oh, now that they're a park, they'll start charging fees. Well, the truth is we could have charged fees
since 1978.
Since 1978. So, and historically on that subject, a lot of people forget that a lot of the old companies did charge fees for other businesses to use some of the takeouts. I feel sure that John Dragon and Whitewater made a little bit of money on allowing people, but as far as private voters, I don't know. Dave, you might know, or Roger, you might remember, because I don't. Did they charge fees then? I don't think for private voters. I think they were just nice to let them take out on their private property. So fees have been part of the history of this park long before it was a park, truthfully.
Well,
the
answer, Lizzie, is that when ClassVI and Adventures on the Gorge owned takeouts, mostly on the Gully, as you would know, we never charged anybody for private usage. We did charge our fellow competitors.
So I'm saying fees are
that's
not
just good. That's just good business.
That was just good business. And I got to say one other thing too. There's a saying in the river business, all guides have heard this, say it 3 times and it's true. Well, a lot of comments I've heard that are just wrong. I say, where did you hear that? And they go, well, I just, so-and-so told me. And I said, well, who told him? Well, so-and-so told him. Well, sometimes say it 3 times it's true is wrong. It works with the frog walls of Brooklyn. We can tell that story, and there were no frog walls there. But there's a lot of stuff out there that's just not true right now.
Roger, would you have anything to add to that?
No, just I'm just thrilled to death we have a national park in our backyard.
Yeah, I think it's great. I've got a question from Larry Blyberg. It said Lizzie broke up a little bit when she was speaking. Can she repeat the names of the 4 areas? And I've got to be honest, Larry, I'm not quite necessarily sure what he's referring to.
I talked a little bit about Sandstone, Grandview, Thurman, and then the Lower Gorge, the parts that are part of the park, if that's
okay. Okay, and we've got Paul Brewer is still watching. He's asking, this is a quick answer for you, Lizzie, I think, is will there possibly be a lodge built, like say at Burnwood by the Park Service? That's another one of those big projects.
It's one of those big projects, and to be honest, we've never talked about it, because one of the things that we've always felt that was real important, and it's more just style than anything else, is that there are other hotels and lodges around the area. So we don't try to compete with businesses when we can help not competing with business, because that's really, if the local economy does that on their own properties and stuff, we find in the federal government, especially the Park Service, that's better business, because they can charge different rates than we can. So we've never talked about any lodging in the Park Service, at least in my tenure. That doesn't mean that it may not happen someday, but no, it's never been part of the conversation, because we always like private campgrounds and private hotels. We figured that's how the community makes money. And how the community grows. And we're long and skinny, so we don't have much flat property.
I got one more question here showing up. This is another one from Facebook, so I'm not sure who it is that is asking it. They are asking, are there any national parks that are similar to the New River Gorge that we would be looking to for guidance for the future of this park?
There are probably a couple other parks that I talk to pretty regularly. Delaware Water Gap comes to mind immediately, just because it's another river ecosystem park, and it's long and skinny and it's a river. So we've paid a little bit of attention, not a little. I actually talk to the superintendent there pretty regularly. Other than that, the National Park Group, since I've been around a few years, I actually know most of the superintendents to all the national parks, but the one we probably paid the most attention to recently has been Delaware Water Gap. And that's like they're doing a new section of trying to restore part of the watershed. So really look at the internal part of the park. There are other parks that I talk to pretty regularly that we look at. The Smokies is probably the best example, because besides just being a riverway, which we spent a lot of time talking about, we're an incredible rich diversity of both plants and animal species that are found here almost nowhere else. And this group of over 1,500 plants and animals. The Smokies, that's one of the things they're noted for, is their diverse ecosystem and their diversity of plants and animal life. And so we've spent a lot of time discussing with them. So that's another park that I pay a lot of attention to. They learned the value of having the entrance to that park look like a park. And so, yes, I talk to them fairly regularly.
I've got one more question from Paul.
Hi,
He
Paul.
wants to know, can we build a whitewater museum at Burnwood?
Building museums right now, to be honest, is a challenge. The Park Service, part of the Great America Outdoors Act, was put into place. Prior to that, it was a part of that is called Restore America's National Parks Bill, and that was the first bill. And what that bill looked at, honestly, was the $12 billion backlog of maintenance that we have been telling everybody that would listen for many, many years throughout the National Park Service. We have tremendous amount of deferred maintenance, things that are falling apart, they're old. We didn't buy anything here new. The only thing new here was the Glen Jean Bank building and Glen Jean office, and then Canyonman Visitor Center and Sandstone Visitor Center. Everything else we've ever purchased has been already older than me, or at least 40 or 50 years old when we got it. That means it's not in good shape. And that's across the service. So the backlog, the maintenance backlog has challenged us a lot. They want that to be taken care of, and it needs to be. So new construction is hard to come by. Now, do I think we need to do something in the community or somewhere, something on the Whitewater, history of Whitewater? I do. I think, and I don't think
it'd be really neat.
I don't think it's just commercial. I think it's commercial and private. I think we have to tell, it's a rich story. It's part of this history that's here. And it made a huge difference to the economy in all kinds of ways. A lot of people moved here because of the recreation of using this river, and not to share that story is kind of sad. I do think it needs to be somewhere. I agree.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question from our viewers, and then we're going to wrap things up. Dave, I might ask you to answer this one. Why did we go with National Park and Preserve, and what's the difference between those two designations?
Well,
That's a really good question. I'm glad somebody asked that. We originally looked at national park, as I told you, and we looked at a national park that allowed hunting. Well, I got beat up, thrown out of the bar, run over by cars. There was no way that was going to happen. It became rather obvious to me. So the question was, if we can't have a national park that allows hunting, what can we have? It was actually Senator Manchin's idea to come up with the Park and Preserve. The Park and Preserve model, even though it's not just Alaska, it is probably the best model. And it has some similarities. Here in Alaska, take Denali, for example, you have the spectacular feature of the mountain of Mount McKinley of Denali, but you also have a huge area that has, in that case, a lot of indigenous people that are hunting there, sometimes hunting for, a living. So you have a system that allows both. And as we've been talking tonight, I think sometimes people get really confused, and it's very, very simple. There is the park and preserve, meaning it is both. There is a large body of land, and then there is the part that is very, very special, which, as Lizzie said, are the four areas, Grandview, Sandstone, Thurman, and the Gorge, that are special, just like McKinley or Denali is special. And then you have all this other land that is still part of the park. It's still important, but it has some rules that are a little bit different, such as hunting. So the answer is, we tried to get a national park, which was the very beginning in the 50s. It was what they were after. The most amazing document to me, in 1963, the state legislature, both the House and the Senate, did a joint resolution to make this a national, they used the word playground, to make it a national playground. And that resolution was sent to President Kennedy. So there was an attempt, and then nothing happened for a couple of years. And for a while I was scratching my head and I said, well, what happened between that resolution and when things really started happening in 73? What happened in that 10 years? Well, it all of a sudden became obvious to me, Kennedy was assassinated. It should have been more obvious to me, but I was like, oh yeah, duh. So there has been momentum towards a national park, but the national park obviously does not fit perfectly with what we have here. And I think it's just one opinion. I think the Park and Preserve was a fabulous compromise. Some people would agree and some would disagree.
Okay. So we are going to go ahead and wrap things up. We're kind of getting to our time limit here. I've got one more question that I'm going to ask of each of you. In 5 words or less, let's say, why should people come to the New River Gorge National Park and Preserve? Roger, let's start with you.
Because it's such a special place that you'll be so surprised that it's here.
Okay, Dave
1 word, adventure.
and Lizzie.
I think inspirational. It's a special place that draws inspiration to us all.
All right. Well, like I said, we are going to wrap up after that. I'm sorry if we did not get to everybody's questions that were coming through online this evening. So, but I'd like to invite everybody to please join us again for our next Adventure Forum, which will be Wednesday, February 17th at 7:30. The title of which is The History of Whitewater in the New River Gorge, Part 1. Thank you once again to all of our panelists for joining us, and we hope we all have a successful 2021 season. And to all of our viewers out there, thank you for joining us. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you next time. This is Chris Hayes signing off from Adventures on the Gorge.